Well, if ever there was a moment when Lando Norris needed to stand up and be counted, it was in the wet in Vegas. All talk of perhaps the team favouring him with a better car or better this or better that disappeared when the raindrops began to fall on that circuit. It was Aquaplain City, Nevada, actually, because this was a circuit where there were no really great corners where a Max Verstappen could start using different lines. It was all about minimising the aquaplaning, particularly in the wets at the beginning, and then making sure you had the car beautifully stable under braking for a great exit, unless you're in a McLaren and you were Lando Norris. And then you could start to throw the car around, bounce from curb to curb. Wonderful car control, beautifully fluid in everything he was doing, and looking as if he's really enjoying himself. Whereas Oscar Piastri, by contrast, everything looked a little bit more edgy, which is really what we've been seeing all year. Even when Oscar was winning races and looking dominant at McLaren, his driving was always a little bit spikier than Lando Norris's. And Lando, now having found this sweet spot and with this momentum that he has behind him, just looked as if he's in a world of his own. Even a massive moment right at the end of his last lap in Q3, when he inevitably overcorrected after hitting a curb a little bit too hard, was not enough to stop him taking the pole. Beating Max Verstappen to Max looking very good in the Red Bull, perhaps not quite as good on the intermediates as he had on the wets, but not being able to do, as I say, what a Max Verstappen can normally do in the rain on a circuit like Brazil, but nonetheless finding the way to do the lap in a Red Bull. It was quite difficult in terms of tyre temperature, quite difficult in terms of what angles he could operate it at, but nonetheless getting the best from it, under braking and getting a beautiful straight line exit. Once he got the tyres warm, which was not an easy thing from his point of view. Red Bull finished the session a little bit early. The track was getting quicker all the time, but then he did avoid a yellow, which came out and certainly slowed Oscar Piastri's last lap, as good as it might have been. George Russell was P4, but P3, another outstanding performance from Carlos Sainz in the Williams-Mercedes. As he took his helmet off in Parc Fermé, the expression on his face basically said, yeah, ahead of the Ferraris yet again. Very difficult session for Ferrari. Charles Leclerc, P9 in all three aspects of qualifying, which says what it says. Whereas Lewis Hamilton, again, did not even get out of Q1. A massive miscommunication again between the driver and the pit wall. Lewis saw the red gantry light coming on, assumed that he'd run out of time, but actually when he'd crossed the start-finish line, he still had half a second to go and he still had another lap he could have put in. It was up to the team to say to him, this could happen, Lewis, be ready, don't just ignore the red. But there was no communication, and he just drove around on that last lap when he could have been going quicker. So another horrendous qualifying session for Lewis Hamilton, who will now be looking pretty deeply, I would imagine, because the wet is something that has always brought out the best in Lewis, and to be last in the wet at Vegas in that Ferrari must be really hurting him right now. George Russell, quickest in the wet in Q1 and Q2, finished P4 on the intermediates in Q3. That's how it went, wet intermediates. He suffered a power steering issue in Q3, and maybe the tyres had gone off a little bit at the end as well. Anyway, for more thoughts on that, on a difficult qualifying day with the rain unexpectedly falling in Vegas, I spoke to Mark Slade to get his immediate thoughts after qualifying. So there we were, Mark, in Brazil, thinking it was going to rain. Nothing happened. Come to Vegas, to the desert. And it's wet on Saturday. I imagine, I don't know, what are your thoughts when you see a wet track?
Fear, I think. And I start to get the cold sweats about all the choices that you have to make, you know, when conditions aren't what you expect. You have to think about your brake temperatures, downforce level, which tyres you're going to put on, and just you have to change your strategy in terms of, obviously you're not doing one-time lap now, so you have to think how you use your engine modes. Do you use them in a continuous way, which costs you some lap time, but means that you at least have good performance when the track might be at its driest, because you can get caught out by that. Normally, the situation we had there was that it had rained and it was looking like the rain was easing off, so you'd expect the times to get quicker towards the end of the session. But on the other hand, someone could go off and cost you your lap. So it's just, it's really, really quite stressful in those conditions to balance everything out as best as you can.
Well, just to flash back to Q1, everybody going out on inters except Aston Martin on the wets, and all of a sudden everybody comes straight in for the wets. And Nico,
yeah. I must admit, I was really surprised at how many people were on inters, because this is a low downforce street circuit with very low grip. And remember Montreal race start last year when the two Hasses went on the full wets, and they were just much quicker than everybody else. Because the problem with the intermediate is you really struggle to get tyre temperature, particularly if you've been sat in the pit lane waiting to start the session. The tyres just get cold very quickly. Whereas the full wet, it's not you don't use blankets for the full wets. They're designed to switch on straight away. So I think that was a really good choice obviously it was a good choice by Aston and Nico. And very quickly we saw other cars peeling into the pits to go onto the wets once they realised they weren't going to get any grip out of the intermediates.
And Aston finishing third and fourth there. Pierre Gasly right up there. George was quickest in Q1, but not getting through to Q2. Kimi Antonelli and Lewis Hamilton.
Yes. I'm not sure what happened with Kimi Antonelli.
I think he had a spin. It looked like we saw the flashback of a spin there.
With Lewis, it was the classic. He crossed the line with time to do another time lap, but the red light on the gantry, which is ahead of the control line, had come on. And I think he just assumed that meant he hadn't made the cut. He hadn't reached the line in time. And so he backed off. And his engineers apparently didn't tell him, keep pushing, you've got another lap. So he backed off. So disaster. Absolute disaster.
And put that on the back of the lack of communication in the Mexican Grand Prix in terms of what he had to do.
Yeah.
It's not looking good there in terms of the way they're running that car.
No. And certainly his body language after the session was very, very down, almost like he wasn't interested. So not good. Not good.
Lando Norris just scraped through from Q1, P13.
Yeah, that was a bit tight, wasn't it? It looked like the McLarens did look like they were struggling to get temperature, even on the full wets, which is kind of something we've said they might struggle on this track generally, because in the past, the fact they're very good on the dry tyres is partly because they keep the wheel rims very cool, but that means that to get those wheels hot enough for wet conditions or even dry conditions if the track's very low energy is quite tricky. So maybe we saw a little bit of that there. But once they got going, they were okay. But yeah, that first session was pretty dicey, really.
What do you think of Charles having a big moment and then seeing the engine cut out?
He stalled it by locking the rear axle up, braking, and which can happen. And when you're on the brakes, the clutch is engaged, the anti-stall won't work because you're fighting the brakes. So he was very lucky there. But I guess they've just got the brake balance wound a long way rearwards and struggling in these extremely low grip conditions. The rear wheels just stopped rotating, and so the engine had no option but to switch, to die. It couldn't keep going. But with these cars, because we've got the electric energy on board, you can restart. Whereas in the old days, that would have been the end of session. So, yeah. But bit of a trip. But the scariest thing was the two cars that were close behind him. He had to he was very quick-witted in the way he pulled out. Once he realised what had happened, he pulled over to the left and two cars came through on time lapse. So averted a bit of a disaster there.
Alex Albon hit the wall. As it turned out, the only one really to hit the wall hard.
Yeah.
Maybe a few others glanced at it. But what a shame in a car that's obviously, as we now know, was good enough to be top three.
Yep. I think he was extremely unlucky. He just got a bit of a snap and he corrected. And the front just grabbed. The front grip just suddenly came in and just took him straight into the wall. Such a shame, because as you say, the car looked really good, and Carlos obviously ran really well. Although, as we know, he might be getting a penalty, unfortunately, later on. But we'll see. But yeah, that was really a shame.
George Russell opted for used wets in Q2. What was he thinking? And Nico Hülkenberg too, I think.
Yeah, I can only think that they were considering that. So there's only 2 sets of full wets per car per weekend, whereas you get 5 sets of intermediates, 4 for qualifying. So I guess they were thinking they might need the new full wet for Q3 if they got through, and they decided that starting Q2 on the used wet should be okay. It hadn't done a lot of running, and it was probably light damage to it, if at all. But because actually we hadn't had rain for a little while and the track was starting to dry, maybe a new one would have been better to get the lap time early. It's all this sort of judgment, because they might have thought that running the used one, the blocks are a little bit more worn down. So on a track that's a little bit less wet, that might actually give you more grip. But it's a tricky one. Probably didn't make an awful lot of difference either way in the end. But that's what I was wondering, is maybe it was to do with what their expectations were.
In a Q3 where the yellows came out right at the end, and a lot of runners therefore didn't get to finish their quickest lap. Lando was a bit surprised. It sounded on the radio, but look at his progression, P13 to P4 in Q2, and then took the pole, and the car looked really drivable on those inters, sliding all over the place, just very, very confident.
Yeah. As the grip came up, he was clearly getting happier and happier with the car, wasn't he? And again, I guess with being able to do a lot of laps on the Inter in Q3, he got it nicely in the window for the end of the session. It looked like maybe some of the other cars had actually potentially overused their tyres by the end of that session. The Inter, in its normal use, you would expect to get 1 or maybe 2 time laps out of the tyre before having to do a lot of cool down laps. And even then, they tend not to recover so well. So it's a more difficult tyre to manage. And I just wonder if with the McLaren seeming to be easier on its tyres, maybe it peaked for him right at the right moment. Whereas other people, it looked like they were starting to run out of lap time improvement towards the end. But it's a bit difficult to tell because of that yellow who might have gone quicker. Certainly, Piastri encountered that yellow, which I think was caused by Leclerc going off at turn 12. So, he was a bit unlucky. He also mentioned in an interview that he had some issues with settings going into his last lap. So I do wonder if there was a bit of confusion about which engine modes he was meant to be in to start that lap, and that maybe hurt him a little bit as well.
Max Verstappen, P2, got his lap in before the yellows, got the lap in a little bit early, you could say, in terms of the track, but equally preempting the yellow.
Yeah. I mean, cream always rises to the top, doesn't it, with these guys? So, he never looked stunning at any point really through any of the sessions, but he was always there or thereabouts, and you just never discount him, can you? Just puts a nice tidy lap in. I mean, to be honest, in Q1, he actually looked like he was struggling, particularly trying to stop the car at turn 14. He had quite a few moments where he ran on and had to come back on again, but then he wasn't alone in that.
No, I think at least 4 times, maybe more. I don't know if they caught him all, but it was at least 4 times he went straight on. But a good P2. And Carlos Sainz, the expression on his face when he got out of the car looked to be, I hope everybody at Ferrari is watching this yet again. I mean, just a sheer talent lap. Wonderful to see.
He's just so smooth. I mean, he's a smooth operator, Carlos.
Yeah, he is. He's got great car control, and he always has had great car control.
And he's very good at getting the car straight and getting the power on. You know, he's so good. We saw that when he was at Renault in end of 17 and 2018. He's very good at looking after his tyres, but his particular capability seemed to be just getting the power on early and treating the rears very nicely. And I think you see that in the wet conditions. He's got very good feel for the car there.
So George, having been quickest in both Q1 and Q2, P4 on the Inters at the end, what do you make of that? And what do you make of Mercedes in general in terms of top speed and where they might be tomorrow?
Well, certainly from the morning, it looked like the Mercedes is particularly quick on the straights. Although, to be fair, it actually looked more that the McLarens were relatively slow compared to most of the other cars. I think Max's car is close to the Mercedes, and the Ferrari's pretty similar as well. But it looks like the Mercedes is the quickest car overall. But still, I think he's looking pretty strong for the race tomorrow, given the speed that he's got. The Williams was also relatively slow in P3 on the straights this morning, so be interesting to see how that pans out. 2 Racing Bulls were good. Fernando Alonso was good.
Yep. Charles Leclerc was 9th in all 3 sessions, which I guess says something about the Ferrari.
Just looked no grip, just really struggling, just never looked really connected, and I guess that's what Lewis was really struggling with as well in Q1. Yeah, he just didn't look at all happy. Looked like a real fight, but you know, Charles got the talent and he was able to get something out of it, get through into Q3. But to be honest, the car didn't look very good. I must say I'm a bit surprised because even in the dry, the Ferraris looked okay, but it hasn't looked quite the pace that I thought it could be on this track. But I think he might have a bit of a tough race tomorrow.
Mark, assuming it's dry tomorrow, I guess the hard tyre will seriously come into play, but nobody seems to have run it, really.
It's interesting, wasn't it? So everyone saved 2 hards apart from Alonso, who ran 3 softs and a medium on Friday. So he's got 2 mediums. The other question is whether the graining of the right front is going to be a big problem or not. I noticed that George and the Ferraris were doing some tyre management in P2. Didn't look like Max was very much. He was doing a little bit of lift and coast, but that might have been for ride height as much as for tyre temperature management. So I know apparently Pirelli have tried to work on the tyres this year to try and reduce the graining even further. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But the fact that the teams have all saved the hards does suggest that they are concerned about it, because otherwise they would have stuck with the mediums. Oh, the other thing that was interesting was that with Norris, they were actually using a speed limiter through 11 and 12 at 285 kph, so that he didn't have to sort of manually manage his tyres through those corners. It's something that all the teams can do, and we tried it at Haas. But what we found was that you could save the energy manually and be a little bit quicker. But it also means that it's easy to get out of that mode. If you suddenly find that the guy in front makes a mistake, you could not do it and catch up, because the DRS detection is just after that left-hand corner. So if you're saving your tyres through the 2 quick corners before that left-hander, there is a danger you're going to drop the gap to the car ahead. So it's a little bit tricky to manage that. Yeah, you can set a speed limiter, a range of speeds to use, and it's something that teams do for tyre management. You can try it, but it does restrict you at that point to that speed. And if the car in front makes a mistake, you can't capitalise on it. Whereas if you manage the speed manually, you've got options available.
And how much was that limiting the speed through there?
I think it was about 15 or 20 Ks down on what some of the other cars were peaking at through there.
Big thanks to Mark for that. Fascinating to see how McLaren are using that speed limiter for tyre management. And that, of course, is allowed in the race as well, and probably does happen quite a lot in the race. And, of course, it was introduced, the speed limiter, for the pit lane when the speed limits came in the pit lane. And it's an interesting thing because the driver obviously can turn it on and off. But if he's over the speed at which the speed limit is going to come in, nothing happens, and he has to get the car down below the speed limit before it can be activated. Before we close, have a look at the description below this video at the latest edition of the REC watches. There are 2 new arrivals, one based on the Bullitt Mustang driven by Steve McQueen in the immortal movie Bullitt, and also from the Datsun 240Z that John Morton used to turn American motorsport on its head in the early 70s when the Japanese arrival came, and working with Peter Brock, who both of them, Morton and Brock, worked for Carroll Shelby, set up on their own and won a lot of races with that 240Z. So if you're into that, and I know Paddy Lowe is a massive Datsun 240Z fan, these watches are for you. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow in the third last round of the 2025 World Championship, the first part of a closing triple header with Lando Norris on the pole for McLaren-Mercedes, and alongside him on the dirty side of the grid, Max Verstappen in the Red Bull Honda. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to Track Ninja, to OEM Exclusive, and of course to REC Watches. See you tomorrow.